Good morning. I'm Doc Benton, and I want to talk today, as quickly as I can, about the aftermath of yesterday's momentous Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I have to confess that these days I sometimes feel like the Heather Cox Richardson of mundane astrology. That may indicate some illusions of grandeur on my part, but just as she does, frequent updates to what's going on in America politically, I like to do frequent updates on what is happening in America and the world via mundane astrology. So, some of the slides I'm going to show you have appeared before in past presentations I've done, but I have some new slides also to give you updates on more recent events. So let me see if I can share my screen and then we can get started. This will take just a minute. I've got to get rid of some panels so that I can see what I'm doing. My voice is a little scratchy this morning, so I may have to pause occasionally to drink some water. But here we go. Saturn conjunct Neptune, the morning after. I have a variety of things I want to talk about. Which chart do I usually use for America? Why is America so strongly impacted by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction? When did the impact of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction begin? What happened in America leading up to the conjunction? What issues will likely be in the news over the next few months? When will the aftershocks occur? Why is April 17th a critical time? When is the Great Harmony? And why am I worried about America's future this summer? What is America's likely future over the next few years? What about Russia? And what is Russia's likely future over the next few years? Okay, there are several charts that astrologers have used for America, and the most common is probably this chart on the right, known as the Sibley chart. It's set for July 4th, 1776 as Sagittarius rising. But a lot of mundane and financial astrologers prefer the chart on the left, which is set for July 2nd, 1776 at 11:50 a.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The reason some of us prefer this chart is because this is when the Declaration of Independence was actually passed by the Continental Congress. July 4th is when it went public, when it was printed and the announcement was made. I think both charts are relevant. I simply have a little bit more of a preference for the July 2nd chart. One of the main differences between these two charts is the position of the moon. The July 2nd chart has moon in Capricorn. The July 4th Sibley chart has moon in Aquarius. Now, since the Declaration of Independence went public on July 4th, I see this chart as representing more of America's persona, the face we like to present to the world. And that is well represented by moon in Aquarius. We like to think of ourselves as leaders in technology, charitable, humanitarians, and exporting freedom and democracy to the rest of the world. But inwardly, we are often more like Moon in Capricorn. We're controlling. We try to control groups of people within this country. We have this very shameful history with slavery, genocide of Native Americans. And even right now, we're trying to control and deport various groups of immigrants to this country and to deny them due process. We also have a history of trying to control other countries. In the past, we did it through military actions and assassination, and then we gave that up for a while and focused on controlling other countries through soft economic power. But now, under the Trump administration, we're engaged with both again, both the exercise of military power and the exercise of economic power through Trump's flagrant use of tariffs. Okay, throughout though, I'll use the July 2nd chart, but a lot of the stuff I say will apply also to the July 4th Sibley chart. Now, why is this Saturn-Neptune conjunction having such an impact on America? Traditionally, it always has a big impact on Russia. There's usually some big change or shift in Russia at the time of these conjunctions. But this time around, I think we can say that America is ground zero for all of the changes that are occurring within the world. And this is why this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is occurring in the first degree of Aries, just happening in the first degree of the first sign of the zodiac, of course, makes it more powerful than usual. And the last time that this conjunction occurred in the first degree of Aries was in the year 4361 BCE. It was a time that historians called the dawn of civilization. So this is like the start of perhaps another 6,000 or longer year cycle. And this could be indicating a next big leap forward for humanity, if we're lucky. I think we will be in the long run, but it is also possible this could be the end of our cycle. Humanity had a good 6,000 year run, but now it's coming to an end. Well, I'm optimistic. But here is why it affects America so much. If we look at this July 2nd chart, we have Venus in the first degree of Cancer. So we have a square that is exact to the degree between transiting Saturn-Neptune and Venus. Among other things, this means that a lot of policies and decisions are being made and taken which are not sitting well with either the American people or our allies. They are in conflict with our values. I should also point out the last time that Neptune was in the first degree of Aries was the morning after the start of the American Civil War, where again, there were philosophies out there that conflicted with people's values, and that resulted in a terrible war. So, America is being incredibly strongly impacted by this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, as is the rest of humanity. But America right now is ground zero, I believe, for this conjunction. Now, when did the impact or impacts of this conjunction begin? Some people might think, okay, the conjunction was yesterday, February 20th. Yes, there were some dramatic news events yesterday, but we're still here. It's done. It's over. What's the big deal? Well, I'll tell you. A conjunction like this is not just a one-day event. Research, statistical research by the late Dr. Johnson Holt on mundane astrology that was published in Correlation, a peer-reviewed journal, his research showed that conjunctions and oppositions between outer planets start to impact things at least a year before the actual conjunction or opposition. And of course, that verifies what Rick Tarnas also saw through his research into mundane astrology that led to his best-selling book, Cosmos and Psyche. So, When did the impact of this conjunction begin? At least a year before the actual conjunction, and I take it back to the beginning of 2025, or if you prefer, to the inauguration of Donald Trump on January 20th of 2025. So think of it this way. Starting around the beginning, well, think of this conjunction as like a massive hurricane. A year ago, starting around the beginning of 2025, we begin to experience the storm surge as that hurricane approaches. And throughout all of 2025, the storm surge is getting higher and higher. And then the actual conjunction on February 20th, 2026, that is like when the hurricane makes landfall and additional damage is done. And then we have the aftermath, where there's a lot of damage. Some of the damage continues, and it takes an awful lot of cleanup, and it changes things. And then, as we'll see shortly, we're going to get a couple of aftershocks in March and April. So, this Saturn-Neptune conjunction wasn't something that just happened yesterday. It has been going on for over a year, going back to around the beginning of 2025. And just look at how Donald Trump has changed things more and more throughout the year leading up to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. The tariffs he's imposed, his flagrant violations of law, the lack of due process he's given to immigrants, American citizens that federal agents have killed under his watch. And it's more than just the two people that were killed in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I see news reports from time to time about other American citizens that have been killed by ICE agents or Border Patrol. Okay, so everything that has happened under Trump and in America with global trade over the past year, that is all part of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction where old structures dissolve and new philosophies and ideologies, new structures take their place. Okay. I'm going to quickly go through a list of some things that have happened this year leading up to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that are related to it. And many of these you may have seen in a previous slideshow I did, but I've got a few new slides added. So we start off on January 3rd. There was the invasion of Venezuela by America. And in this chart for Venezuela, transing Saturn and Neptune were conjunct Mars and opposite the Sun. So Saturn-Neptune had an impact on that. We had the killing of Renee Good on January 7th. And transiting, well, let me point out, I don't have an exact time for her birth, but we still know some things for certain. Transing Saturn-Neptune were conjunct her natal Mercury and square her natal Saturn-Uranus conjunction. And most likely, as a trigger, she had transing Mars, Venus, and Sun, making a square to her natal moon. Let's see, on January 21st, Donald Trump went to that economic summit in Davos. He had transing Uranus, square natal Mars. He went in with a lot of bluster, talking about how America is going to take over Greenland one way or another, and if they don't sell it to us, he'll just send in the troops and invade it. When he spoke at Davos, Saturn and Neptune were conjunct the cusp of his eighth house. I'm using the Campanus house system. If you use a different house system, you'll have either Saturn, Neptune conjunct the cusp or within the eighth house. So it works out the same either way. And it's making a quincunx to his natal Mars and his ascendant. The quincunx usually requires some sort of change or adjustment to be made. And the eighth house has a lot of different meanings: death, transformation, other people's money, debts. But I claim it also refers to the values of other people. And that is because the second house has a natural affinity with Taurus, the second sign in the zodiac. And Taurus is ruled by Venus, which, in addition to reducing tension, uh, and resulting in what we consider to be good and bad, it represents people's values, their value system. And so the eighth house would be the collective or social counterpart to that. It can represent the values of others. And at Davos, Trump was confronted by the values of all the other European leaders who were united in telling him he cannot take over Greenland. He cannot invade Greenland. Because it's a quincunx, Trump didn't know what to do. And faced with this opposition, he just folded. He couldn't gain any traction to, uh, to oppose the other leaders. So he just folded. He gave a speech. He kept referring to Greenland as Iceland, but he assured the other leaders he would not use military force against Greenland or Iceland. Okay, on January 24th, another killing in Minneapolis by ICE agents or federal agents, the killing of Alex Preddy. Again, I don't have an exact birth time for him, but we do know that on this day, transiting Saturn and Neptune were conjunct his natal Mars and square his natal Saturn and Uranus. We saw that same square in the chart of Renee Good. Very interesting. On January 29th, Don Lemon was arrested while covering protesters who had entered a church where the pastor is also an ICE agent. And it's interesting because Saturn, Neptune, we can see their conjunct his natal Mercury. This can also represent a curtailment of freedom of speech. Don Lemon's freedom of speech as a reporter, in particular, to cover this event. But again, you see Saturn, Neptune is making an impact. And I'll also point out, I don't have an exact time for Don Lemon's birth, but this conjunction with natal Mercury, that is certain. It's just things like the rising sign we don't know about. Also for Nancy Guthrie, she was abducted on February 1st, 2026, and Saturn and Neptune were conjunct her, natal Neptune. Now, there are going to be a lot of people born around the same time as her. They're not all going to be abducted. In this case, this aspect from Saturn Neptune was probably the straw that broke the camel's back. And she had other things going on. She had Mars and Pluto conjunct her natal sun and opposite her natal Pluto, for instance. And also, they were square her natal Mars. So this was not the only tension in her chart on that day, but Saturn and Neptune do appear to be implicated in her abduction. And then we have Lindsey Vonn breaking her leg in multiple places on February 8th, 2026, and you can see Saturn Neptune is involved. It's making a square to her natal Neptune. And a little bit more recently, just the day before the exact conjunction, we have Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, I call him the former pedophile known as Prince. He was arrested on February 19th in 2026 for some of his actions in connection with Epstein. And Saturn and Neptune are not making a direct opposition per se to his chart. But we could point out it is, well, I take that back. It is making a square to his Jupiter. So we can count that as a direct hit. I'll need to add that to my list over here. But also, he has a strong opposition of Jupiter to his natal Saturn, and I have a hypothesis. If something is going on by way of transit with transing Saturn, such as this strong, almost exact conjunction with Neptune, that can be folded into this opposition here. And so actually we have Jupiter and Saturn involved in two ways. This opposition from transing Jupiter to natal Saturn, and also transiting Saturn and Neptune, still making a square to his natal Jupiter. I'm using tight orbs, so this is actually, I didn't count this as a square going into this. You're not going to see it in the list over here, but using an orb that most people will accept of about 2 degrees, between 2 and 3 degrees, it is still squaring this natal Jupiter. And there's some other things also going on in his chart. Transiting Chiron is conjunct his natal midheaven, suggesting wounding to a status that has been ongoing. It's separating right now. And transing Uranus is square his natal Chiron. This one is very, very important because it's applying, it is within 4 minutes of arc of being exact, indicating sudden wounding to the former prince. Okay. Now, some other things that we have seen as we have gotten closer and closer to the exact conjunction of Saturn and Neptune is at the Munich Security Conference, Marco Rubio and European leaders. The headline says they agree on one thing: the old world order no longer exists. So because of the things America has done, this post-World War II world order of globalism, economic prosperity, and America leading the way, that's no longer true. America has stepped back. And going forward, America may continue to exist, but it will no longer be the superpower and world leader that it has been since the end of World War II. An old order is going away, a new one is taking its place. That is exactly the sort of thing that you expect during Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, and this one in particular, which I have described as, I've said, it will be a tsunami of a conjunction, stronger, more impactful than ever. There are many things that were in the news last summer when Saturn and Neptune came very close to an exact conjunction. They stayed within 1 degree orb of one another almost all summer long. And a lot of the issues or things that were in the news last summer can come back at this time and maybe achieve some sort of fruition or completion. One of those things is artificial intelligence and the way it will alter our labor market. And it's been predicted that by 1930, 92 million jobs will be gone. And a lot of those are going to be entry-level jobs and routine white-collar jobs. And a lot of these jobs have already disappeared. Of course, the Epstein files was in the news last summer and is back in the news right now. Last summer, it was pressure from the public to release the Epstein files. And eventually, in the fall, I believe, Congress passed laws said they had to be released by December 19th. That did not happen, but eventually we have gotten partial releases, redacted releases, overly redacted releases. And I expect that the pressure will keep building and more of these files will be released. And we're starting to see impacts of even those partial over redacted releases. There are people in high positions that are losing their jobs, their status. And of course, as I mentioned, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested on February 19th on suspicion of having passed top security or secret information. I think of a financial uh, nature on to Epstein. And there was this other headline just the other day, Department of Justice scrubs record of interviews with Trump accuser from Epstein files. The cover-up is apparently continuing, but public pressure is also mounting. And so I think we are eventually going to see what we need to see from those files. And then there is Iran. Last summer, Trump bombed some nuclear sites in Iran, and that's back in the news now. And recently, Trump has given Iran 10 days to reach a nuclear deal in order to avoid military action. And it's starting to look more and more like some limited type of military action or bombing will take place. On the day of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, just about an hour before it was exact, the Supreme Court struck down Trump's tariffs. He said most of the tariffs he put in place were not legal and have to be removed. Trump's response was to use other laws, invoke other laws, and announce a new across-the-board 10% global tariff. He did that after raging and whining about the Supreme Court loss. So all of these things are issues that are probably going to be continuing. The Epstein files, the tariff issue, artificial intelligence, tensions with Iran. These are very likely to continue until they get some sort of resolution. Now, if we look at Saturn conjunct Neptune, how it impacts this chart, this July 2nd chart for America, I'm just going to hit a few highlights. We have this very strong square between Saturn, Neptune, and Venus. Things are going on that are contrary to people's values and the values of people in other countries. That is why America is at center stage for everything happening during this conjunction. We have the transing lunar nodal axis still making a strong square to natal Uranus. People are ready to revolt. We have transing Jupiter, square natal Saturn. That can work out in a lot of different ways. It can be a disconnect between growth and regulation. It can be a disconnect between progressives trying to work with conservatives. Since Jupiter is going through the 10th house in this chart for America, it could be overreach by Trump in the executive branch, which we have seen time and time again, and ignoring the rules and laws of our society. Transiting Mercury is making a pretty good square to natal Mars. There can be a lot of protest and vocal anger over things that are going on. We have some other things happening which exacerbate some of these situations, but we also have transiting Uranus making a trine to natal Pluto. I think that is most likely to manifest in terms of protests and returning power to the people. This is because in America, well, Pluto represents the power of a country. And in America, legally, the power is in the hands of the people. It belongs to the people. And that is punctuated by the fact that in this chart, Pluto is in the fourth house, not the 10th house, the executive branch, but the fourth house representing more the home, the homeland, and the people therein. So I think we are also going to be seeing more protests by people, and that the people will more and more try to take back their power from this administration that is guilty of all kinds of overreach. If we look at Donald Trump, this is interesting. Transiting Saturn and Neptune are conjunct the cusp of his natal eighth house. This could mean that he is going to die in office, or that he will undergo some sort of transformation while in office. Because I'm using very, very tight orbs here for some of these aspects, you're not seeing this making a quincunx to the natal ascendant, but we can consider this as a pretty good quincunx. And so just at Davos, this conjunction could represent the values of other people that may eventually force Trump to change his direction. We have transiting Chiron making a square to natal Saturn. That will also impact his status, since Saturn is conjunct Venus, ruler of his 10th house. Could also impact his health, since Saturn rules his 6th house. But he will be wounded in some way, and we're seeing him wounded now. His ratings are very, very low. Transiting Jupiter is square natal Chiron. Again, overreach of some sort on his part will likely wound him in some way. Transiting Uranus is still square natal Mars. He's still very angry and chaotic. But he is getting a lifeline from transiting Mars, trine his natal Sun. This is at least strengthening his constitution. And the transiting lunar nodal axis is making a sextile and trine to his natal Mercury. So he still is speaking effectively, though I might say rambling effectively, what he calls the weave. Transiting lunar nodal axis is semi-square sesquiquadrate natal Saturn that is exacerbating the square to natal Saturn by Chiron. So he is having certain problems on this day, and those problems are going to be going forward. But transiting Mars trine natal Sun, that will give him some relief, a bit of a lifeline, some vitality. Now, some of the issues that I think were around last summer that we might see some repetition of or resolution of around the time of or following this Saturn-Neptune conjunction are tariffs, the Epstein files, tensions with Iran, artificial intelligence, protests, the status of Gaza, the status of the war between Russia and Ukraine, and climate change. There may be some others. We'll see. But these are things I expect to be in the news over the next few months. Okay, here are the aftershocks. Saturn and Neptune are both going to be crossing from southern declination to northern declination about the same time. Saturn will cross first in late March. It'll cross the celestial equator here, and then Neptune will cross this celestial equator in late April. And whenever one of these outer planets crosses the celestial equator, that tends to result in some sort of shift in society. So this is going to reinforce the impact of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, just as the solar eclipse that occurred 3 days prior also reinforces and strengthens that conjunction. So these will be aftershocks in late March and late April that will contribute to the restructuring of myths, social myths, and ideologies that will occur due to this conjunction. Then we get to April 17th, and I first was alerted to what would happen around the time of this new moon by the very great British astrologer Steve Judd. I always say he can say more in 2 minutes than many other astrologers can say in 2 hours. But he pointed out this big pileup that we're going to have in Aries. At the time of this new moon, we have Neptune conjunct Mercury, Mars conjunct Saturn, which is very warlike, very aggressive. That could trigger some bad things. And then we have Chiron conjunct the moon and sun, which could result in some wounding. And all of these planets are in Aries, which is very independent, but also very assertive and aggressive, uh, very eager to take action. So this is a very ominous looking new moon. And America and some of its institutions, the Federal Reserve Board, Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange, other things are going to be impacted by this. Here I'll just look at a few of its impacts on America. Sun, Moon, and Chiron are going to be very strongly square natal Pluto. This could wound the power of the American people in some way, but it could wound the country's power or even Donald Trump's power. I think it's more likely at this point that we may see some wounding of people power in this country at that time. If the rising sign for this July 2nd, 1776 chart is accurate, then transiting Saturn and Mars are going to be conjunct the descendant, opposite the ascendant, square the midheaven, completing a T-square here. This could represent some sort of conflict with others, particularly other countries. Hopefully, we can avoid a physical war. But this shows some sort of action taken. It might be a trade war, continuation or escalation of that. Pluto is moving into a conjunction with the South Node, and it won't make an exact conjunction until 2027 and into 2028. I think it will make 5 exact conjunctions over that 2-year period, but we get close to it this year. And historically, whenever Pluto comes into a conjunction or square to the lunar nodal axis, we tend to get some transformations in society and often conflict either abroad or at home. We're going to have transing Mars square natal Jupiter, which is close to the cusp of the seventh house. That could be trouble for the executive branch or perhaps our relationships with other countries. And the transing lunar nodal axis is still with an orb of making a square to natal Uranus, uh, provoking some revolutionary feelings. It's always a big question of, are we headed toward another civil war or another American Revolution in America, or both? To some extent, we're getting both. At least at this new moon, the aspect from the squares from the lunar nodal axis to natal Uranus, they're waning at this point. But there's still a lot of tension here for America around the new moon and on April 17th of 2026. So be careful out there. Now, the day, July 21st, 2026, this is a day that the late great mundane astrologer Andre Barbeau thought would be the most harmonious day of the century. And this is because so many of these beneficial trines and sextiles are exact to the degree. We have Pluto at 4 degrees, Neptune 4 degrees, Uranus at 4 degrees, Jupiter at 4 degrees. We have a mystic rectangle with Chiron at 0 degrees, South Node 0 degrees, Moon 0 degrees, North Node 0 degrees. We have some oppositions in this chart, but they are going to most likely just stimulate some action. But the trines and the sextiles will release tension and make those actions rather harmonious. Saturn square Mercury, that will cause some frustration. But most of what we see here is very, very harmonious. Okay, so this is going to be a great time. And if you look at the new moons, the equinox and solstice that follow, almost all of them have a lot of very, very nice trines and sextiles in them. Consequently, I have been saying that the first half of this year will likely be more difficult than the second half of the year. Much more harmony in the second half. But not so harmonious for America and Donald Trump. For America, it doesn't matter if you use the July 2nd chart or the July 4th Sibley chart. The same thing's going to happen. Saturn, transiting Saturn, is going to be stationary for about 2 months at 14 degrees of Aries. That puts it directly opposite natal Saturn at 14 degrees Libra. That is true for all the July 1776 charts you might use for America. And in Donald Trump's chart, he has Chiron at 14 degrees Libra. So for 2 months, transiting Saturn will be just sitting there in opposition to his natal Chiron, which can result in some significant wounding to him. Now, there are a couple of long-lasting aspects for both America and Donald Trump during this time, and they might provide both some lifelines. In America's chart, transiting Chiron will be sextile natal Venus for an extended period, and in Trump's chart, transiting Chiron will be trine the ascendant for an extended period. Though as this opposition from Saturn gets stronger in the latter half of July, early part of August, The trine from Chiron is weakening at that point, so his lifeline may falter. But in each instance, these good aspects could act as lifelines to offset some of the damage or intensity that Saturn could hold for both America and for Donald Trump. But at the same time, J.D. Vance has a very favorable chart, very favorable transits on July 21st, 2026. Transing Uranus is in his 10th house of status conjunct the North Node. There could be a sudden change and elevation in his status. Transing Jupiter, Neptune, and Pluto are making a sextile and trine to the natal lunar nodal axis. And transing Pluto is making a trine and sextile to the natal. Let's see. Let me take a look at this. Well, this is actually just a repetition of what I have up here. Sorry about that. In an earlier presentation, I had a typo. I had natal ascendant here, when it's really the natal lunar nodal axis. So you can scratch out this one because it's contained up here. But what we do have is transing lunar nodal axis is making both a sextile and trine, I believe, to his natal Pluto here. So in two ways, we have some kind of connection between lunar nodal axis and Pluto, very favorable connections. Things are going on that could elevate his status and his power. And if we look at his progress chart, his progress sun and ascendant are making a trine to his natal midheaven. And his progress midheaven is making a trine to his natal moon. So one possibility is something may happen. Something may happen, which could cause Trump to have to vacate the presidency, either voluntarily or he may be forced out. He may die in office. I don't know exactly. But all I know is that there's a dark cloud over America and Trump in July and August of this year. At the same time, very favorable transits and progressions. In J.D. Vance's chart, we have a good time for J.D. Vance, but J.D. Vance has aspects which show some change in his status, probably some very favorable change in his status. He could ascend to the presidency. If he doesn't, he will still probably get some additional prominence within the administration, even if Trump remains in power. If he does become president, however, that also worries me because if you go online, look at his political positions, many of them are very far to the right. And that does not please me. Okay. This shows significant transits to America's chart, that July 2nd, 1776 chart in 2027, 2028. We have 5 exact conjunctions of Pluto to the south node, which means it's opposite the north node. And again, America often finds itself undergoing transformation or embroiled in conflict at home or abroad whenever it makes a conjunction, opposition, squared to the lunar nodal axis. But then we also have 3 Uranus returns, 3 exact conjunctions of transing Uranus with natal Uranus and America often finds itself at war or conflict at home or abroad when Uranus returns to its natal position of about 8 degrees Gemini. So, next couple of years could be very, uh, very concerning for America, a very rocky road ahead. And let me go back to J.D. Vance's chart for a second here. Let's see. Let's look at this one. This is his natal chart on the inside. Notice that Vance's Chiron is at 7 degrees Gemini. His Uranus is at 9 degrees Sagittarius. In the USA chart, uh, Uranus is at 8 degrees Gemini. So what do we have? We have Vance's Chiron, his natal Chiron is stimulating Uranus in the USA chart. Vance's natal Uranus is in opposition to natal Uranus in the USA chart. Vance's progressed Chiron is even more strongly conjunct Uranus in those July 1776 charts. And we know that when Uranus is activated in that chart for America, there tends to be war or revolution going on at home or abroad. And with J.D. Vance's natal chart and progress chart stimulating Uranus in the USA chart, regardless of which July 1776 chart you use, that really concerns me. That could be problematical for America. So there is a potential for a couple of rough years down the road for America. Now, what about Russia? Russia has a history of being impacted strongly by Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. And a lot of people feel like Russia's infrastructure and economy are falling apart right now as a result of the war in Ukraine. After the Soviet Union fell apart on December 25th, 1991, Russia was reborn. We don't know the exact time, but we know sometime after 6, the Soviet Union flag came down, the new Russian flag went up the pole. So actually, the actual transition must have been made a little bit before that. And if this chart erected for 5:20 p.m. Moscow time works well, then the Saturn-Neptune conjunction will be strongly conjunct the midheaven in this chart. If this time for the birth of Russia on December 25th is way off, well, that is going to change things. But if this is accurate, we have Saturn, Neptune conjunct the midheaven, which could impact the leadership in Russia. And let's see, we also, this will be the case regardless of what time of day this new country was born on December 25th, 1991. Transing Pluto is conjunct natal Saturn. And so we're expecting this tight conjunction is going to last for several months and go on for more than 1 year. So we're expecting probably a destruction or transformation of structures in Russia. Could be governmental structures, infrastructure, things like that. And transiting Mars is square this Pluto-Venus conjunction. Pluto in America's chart represents power in the hands of the people. In Russia's chart, it represents power in the hands of Putin. I believe that Putin's chart has Scorpio rising, Pluto in the 10th house. So this usually impacts Putin. This could represent aggressive actions taken toward Putin, or it could provoke Putin to engage in more warlike activities. Now, Saturn Neptune up here is making a trine to the ascendant that kind of throws Russia a lifeline if this ascendant, if this rising degree is accurate. But we'll just have to watch and see. This could help save Putin, though I do expect him to be gone within a few years, if not this year. But it's always a question of, does he have such a firm grip on power and money in that country that he can ride out a lot of these difficulties? Well, if he does or if he doesn't, the difficulties are still here. There's still going to be a transformation, most likely, of infrastructure and probably destruction of infrastructure in that country. Okay. Now, one thing I want to point out here is after Pluto finishes its conjunction with natal Saturn, it's going to move into opposition with natal Chiron. And then by the time this is done, transing Chiron will have moved first into a square with natal Saturn, and then that'll be followed by a square with natal Chiron. So Russia has a few rough years ahead of it. And I'll show you the upcoming transits in just a second, but these are some recent headlines. Russia's economy enters serious crisis, echoing late Soviet collapse, intelligence says. And I saw this video just the other day. Everything is falling apart. Russia's failing infrastructure. And you can see how things are empty on some aisles in the stores. They're having problems with pipes bursting, with electrical blackouts, things just not working, things not being repaired. The economy is faltering more and more. And here are the transits ahead for Russia from 2026 through early 2030. We have Pluto conjunct Saturn. It's starting right now. Start around, I think, the 19th. Lasts for several months. Comes back for several months in 2027. Then we have Pluto in opposition to Chiron for several months in 2028, 2029. And that's going to overlap with transing Chiron square Saturn, followed by transing Chiron square natal Chiron. So, Russia is a closed society now. We don't get all the news of what's happening in Russia, but has a long history of being impacted by Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. And I expect it to be impacted this one, and other transits tell us that Russia has some rough years ahead. It's possible, but I would be really surprised if Putin is able to endure all of this difficulty happening now and difficulty that lies ahead. America, though, appears to be at the epicenter, right at the center of these huge transformations in the world order that are going on now as a result of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And as I emphasized at the beginning of this is not just a one-day event. It did not start just yesterday. It began early on in 2025, and it culminated on February 20th of 2026. 2025, the start of 2025 was when the storm surge began. February 20th, 2026 was when the hurricane made landfall. And then there are going to be some aftershocks following in late March and late April. And even more difficulties for America around the time of the new moon on April 17th, 2026. As I've been saying, the first half of the year is going to be harder for the world. The second half of the year is going to be easier. But America and Trump could potentially have a very difficult summer when Saturn just remains stationary at 14 degrees Aries for 2 months in opposition to America's natal Saturn and Trump's natal Chiron. But Trump's misfortune could be J.D. Vance's fortune. Something could happen to Trump. Vance could become president. And God help us if that occurs. I don't think he's going to be a person who steers the country in the best course when we get into these difficult transits that are going to follow for America in the years 2027 and 2028. But maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. Hopefully things will turn out better than expected, but we'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, that is the update for the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that hopefully brings you up to date on more recent events. As we get new information, we have a better idea of what to expect in the future. It'll be an interesting road ahead, to say the least. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you join me for more videos. I hope I can live up to my illusions of grandeur of being the Heather Cox Richardson of mundane astrology. So hope you join me again. And for now, I'll just say so long and be well.